Good day. We are now on the third major topic in pre-calculus, and this is an ellipse. In this topic, you will learn different equations of an ellipse, its derivation, and its application to real-life situations. To further understand the coverage of our lesson, here are the learning outcomes and learning outline of the said topic. On our learning outcome, at the end of the lesson, you will be able to define an ellipse. Number 2, determine the standard form or equation of an ellipse. It consists of 4 standard equations. Number 3, you will be able to graph the ellipse in a rectangular coordinate system or XY plane. And lastly, you will be able to solve situational problems involving conic sections, specifically yung ellipse. Okay? And here is our learning outline. Number 1, we have definition of an ellipse. And then the derivation of the standard equation of an ellipse. I'm going to give you a separate video for the derivation of the equation. Number 3, graphing ellipses. Sa graphing of ellipses, kasama na din dyan yung different equations ng ating ellipse. Okay? And of course, solving the situational problems involving ellipses. So, yung learning outline natin, 4 lang. But as we go along to the graphing of ellipses, which is number 3, madidivide pa ito into 3 or 4 subtopics. Okay? Okay? We're going to start the lesson from the definition of an ellipse and its different parts. Okay? What is an ellipse? It says, an ellipse is a set of all points in a plane, the sum whose distances from two fixed points is a constant. The fixed points are called foci. Okay. So, ibig sabihin, any point on an ellipse, if we're going to measure the two distances from these two fixed points called foci, it is sand. Okay. So, let me give you an illustration based from the definition of this ellipse. So, ito yung ating illustration of an ellipse. At ganito rin kung paano mag-draw ng curve ng isang ellipse. Now, we have here a point P, any point on the curve of our ellipse. If we're going to add the distances of this point from the foci, it is always constant. And that constant value is 2a. So any point on the curve, starting from the foci, from the focus to that point, if we're going to get the distances and we're going to add these two distances, it is always equal to a. Ano ba yung a? Yung a natin, yung distance from the center to the vertex of an ellipse. Okay? Mamaya ipapaliwanag ko kung ano yung a na yon. Okay? Basta't itong a na to, simula sa gitna ng ating ellipse hanggang dun sa vertex ng ellipse, yun ang measurement ng ating a. Okay? Mamaya ipapaliwanag ko yan. Ano ba yung center? Intersection ng major axis and minor axis. Ayan, nagkameron naman tayo ng another terms. Ano yung major at ano yung minor axis? Axis of symmetry, the line that passes through both foci is an axis of symmetry and meets at two points called vertices. So, tatlo yung terms natin dito. Center, axis of symmetry, at saka vertices. Nasaan ba yung mga yon sa ellipse? Yung center natin, ito. Ito yung ating tinatawag na axis of symmetry. Ito. Nangyari dito, yung center ng ating ellipse is also naroon sa origin of the XY plane. So, ibig sabihin, ang center of the ellipse is at 0, 0. Okay? So, yung axis of symmetry natin, sabi, dadaan daw sa focus at dadaan din sa ating vertex. Sa makatwid, ito yung ating axis of symmetry. Yan. At yung axis of symmetry natin, mapapansin nyo, along x-axis. Okay? Yung minor axis natin ay ito. Okay? Yan yung minor axis natin. At yung major axis natin, ito, from vertex to vertex. Yun yung major axis. So, ibig sabihin, pag nag-intersect, yung intersection ng minor axis at saka major axis, naroon yung location ng center ng ating ellipse. Okay? Tandaan, major axis, minor axis, and axis of symmetry dadaan din sa vertex, focus, and center of our ellipse. Okay. Depende pa yon kung yung ating ellipse ay vertical or horizontal. Okay? Yung kanina, we have horizontal ellipse, meaning the major axis is parallel or along the x-axis, and the minor axis, balik natin, minor axis natin parallel sa y-axis, ang ating major axis parallel sa x-axis. Kapag naka-vertical yung ating ellipse, mababaliktad. Okay? Yung axis of symmetry parallel to y-axis, hindi ko na lang nabago yung ating xy plane here. Supposedly, this should be x and this should be y. Yung minor axis natin, nangyari parallel na or along the x-axis, while the major axis is parallel or along our y-axis. Okay? So, depende yung orientation ng ating ellipse. Ma-define yung ating mga parts ng ellipse. Okay? Ano ulit yung major axis? Line joining the vertices and the foci and has a length 2a. So, ang haba ng ating major axis from vertex to vertex, 2a. At yung kalahati nun, a, at tatawagin natin siyang semi-major axis. Also, yung major axis natin, tinatawag ding transverse axis. Okay? Major axis is also called transverse axis. And the length of the major axis is always 2a. Okay? Kalahati nun ay a, yun yung semi-major axis. Yung minor axis, tinatawag ding conjugate axis. Okay? Sino siya? Siya yung line segment perpendicular bisector of the major axis and has a length 2b. So, ibig sabihin, yung dulo sa dulo natin, ito, from this point up to this point, yan yung tinatawag nating minor axis. Okay? Minor axis yon. At ang length ng minor axis, 2b. Yung kalahati ng 2b na si b, siya yung tinatawag na semi-minor axis ng ating ellipse. So, napakaraming parts nitong ellipse na to. I want you to na ulit-ulitin na panoodin itong video na to para maintindihan yung mga parts ng ating ellipse. No? So, ito na. No? So, ito yung ating minor axis. Ito yung ating major axis. At yung ating axis of symmetry naroon din. Dadaan din doon sa major axis natin. And of course, the intersection of these two axes is the center of our ellipse. Okay? Anong haba ng ating major axis? 2a. From vertex to vertex, ang haba nun ay 2a. Yung kalahati nun, from center to one of the vertex ng ating parabola, ellipse, ay ang haba ay a. Tatawagin yung semi-major axis. Okay. Pagdating naman sa minor axis, ang haba nun from this point up to this point, yan yung ating tinatawag na minor axis, ang haba niya ay 2b. At ang kalahati niya ay b. Okay? Tatawagin yung semi-minor axis. Again, ang major axis also called transverse axis. Minor axis is also called conjugate axis. At ang haba nila, 2a for the major axis kalahati nun, A, also called semi-major axis, and the length of the conjugate axis is 2B. Its half is the semi-minor axis, equivalent to B. Okay? Ano pa yung parts of the ellipse? Directrix. Directrix is a line such that the ratio of the points on the conic section from focus to its distance from the directrix is constant. So, constant ulit yun. Ano daw yun? Any point dun sa ating ellipse. Let's say we have your point P. F1 to point P, and from point P to directrix L1, if you're going to get that ratio, it is always constant to E. Ano yung E na yun? Yun yung eccentricity. And when we say eccentricity, that is deviation of a curve from circularity. Ibig sabihin, mame-measure natin yung eccentricity niya based from its deviation from being a circle. Sa makatwid, ang circle, ang deviation niya is 0. Kasi, circle do not deviate from being a circle. Okay? So, ang eccentricity of the conic sections are the following. For a circle, the deviation is 0, or eccentricity is 0. For a parabola, its deviation or eccentricity is equal to 1. And for the ellipse, ang kanyang eccentricity lies between 0 to 1, exclusive of 0 and 1. And for the hyperbola, we have eccentricities greater than 1. Okay. Again, ano yung eccentricity? Deviation of a curve from circularity or sa pagiging circle. So, sa makatuwid, nagde-deviate, magkakameron lang ng eccentricity value ang isang curve or conic section kapag hindi siya circle or circular. Okay? And that constant value, yung ratio nito, PF1 to PL1, is always constant E. Okay? Even yung orbit of the planets in our solar system, meron ding eccentricity yon. Kasi ang kanyang path is elliptical. So, lahat ng yung orbit of the planets in the solar system, may mga equivalent value na eccentricity. Okay? Next, ano pa? Latus rectum. Parang latus rectum din ito ng ating parabola. Pero pagdating sa ellipse, dalawa. Kasi we have two foci. Ano yon? Ano yung latus rectum? It is the chord that passes through the focus and is perpendicular to the major axis. Okay. So, tingnan natin sa graph ng ellipse kung ano yung latus rectum. Hindi natin siya tatawaging latus rectum since dalawa na. Ang term natin gagamitin is latera recta. Okay? Perpendicular si latera recta dun sa ating major axis. Ito itong major axis natin. And yung ating latera recta dadaan sa focus of the ellipse on both focus, sa left and right. Okay. At ang length ng ating latus rectum o latera recta is 2b squared over a. Okay? 2b squared over a. Ano nga ba yung a? That is the semi-major axis. Yung b natin ay semi-minor axis. So, mamaya, pag-aaralan natin lahat yan. Okay? And then, kung yung haba ng latus rectum is 2b squared over a, that is from the endpoints, itong tigkabilang duro ng ating latera recta, from focus to one of the ends ng ating latus rectum, ang haba niya is b squared over a, which is half of 2b squared over a. Okay? So, ito na yung ating mga points ng ating ellipse na ating aalamin in order for us to illustrate the graph of an ellipse. Ano-ano yung mga yon? We have the vertices of V sub 1, V sub 2, the center. We have the foci F1, F sub 2, we have ends of the minor axis, B sub 1, B sub 2. We have E1, E2, E3, E4. Ano yun? Yun yung ends of, o endpoints of the latera recta. And we have equation of the directrices, D sub 1 and D sub 2. So, marami tayong i-determine ng points ng ellipse para ma-draw o ma-sketch natin yung graph of the ellipse. Okay? So, yon yung mga parts ng ellipse. Ito yung ating mga notations na gagamitin. We have C for the center, F1, F2 for the foci, V sub 1, V sub 2 for the vertices, B1, B2 for the covertices, o ito yung endpoints of the conjugate axis or minor axis. We have P, any point along the ellipse, D sub 1, D sub 2, directrices, E sub 1, E sub 2, E sub 3, and E sub 4, ito yung endpoints of the latera recta. A, distance from the center to vertex. B, distance from center to one endpoint of the minor axis. And C, distance from center to focus. Okay? And E, eccentricity. 2A, length of the major axis. 2B, length of the minor axis. So, tandaan yung mga gagamitin natin mga variables for these distances and endpoints. So, that will be the definition of an ellipse and the different parts of an ellipse. So for my next video, we're going to learn the different equations of an ellipse. So thank you.